Love, exciting and new. Hello, Hannah Waddingham here. Have you seen the fabulous new Sun Princess? World-class entertainment, exceptional dining, and the greatest pizza ever. It's a love.
Don't miss our Come Aboard sale with up to 40% off and free room upgrades. Visit princess.com or call your travel advisor to book. Princess Cruises. Terms and restrictions apply. Offer ends 2/28/25. Ships of Bermudan and British Registry.
What am I afraid will happen if I let go? What am I afraid will happen if I surrender? Start with emotions. What am I afraid will happen if I surrender to all of those big emotions? Because again, I want to remind you, surrender is not about losing control. It's about releasing the illusion that we ever had control in the first place. You're listening to Make Some Noise podcast, episode number 661. Welcome to Make Some Noise podcast, your guide for strategies, tools, and insight to empower yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Owen, global speaker, entrepreneur, life coach since 2007, and author of 3 books that have been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. Each week, I'll bring you a guest or a lesson that will help you maximize unshakable confidence, master resilience, and make some noise in your life. You ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here. I hope truly that you have been enjoying these 10 lessons, what I'm calling coming home to yourself. And I have enjoyed bringing them to you. They are walking our way weeks out to my 50th birthday. And I wanted to do something special for that. And this is what I'm doing. I'm giving you 10 life lessons as I have learned them the hard way, as we all do. Life lessons usually are that way. We usually don't learn them, just by listening to a podcast and then we get it. The beauty of these and what I'm talking to you about is that you'll recognize them when they happen to you. That's really truly it. And my hope is that I can bring you universal truths that really aren't about me, but that you can see yourself through my lessons, through my stories. And that's what I can bring you so you can improve your own life. That being said, I've also decided to post on Instagram at a more regular schedule. And so you might have seen that over there. I'm at Hey Andrea Owen if you don't follow me over there. And I've decided to start writing more. And this is going to look like posts on Instagram, those cool little meme things, the carousel posts, and making more reels in short video format. But I hope you join me over there. I'm hoping to create more community, more conversation. We need that right now as we are in a very uncertain, for some very scary, for some enraging, raising my hand, things that are happening in US politics. And I feel like we need now more than ever to buckle down and create community. More things than that, continue to call your representatives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not what I came here to talk about today. Today, I came here to talk about surrender, the life-changing magic of surrender. Before we get into it, I have 3 very quick announcements. The first one, there is a free worksheet for this podcast episode and all of them, all these 10 Coming Home to Yourself episodes. If you go to the show notes or andreaowen.com/661, that's where you'll find the download to grab those PDF worksheets. The other thing is I'm doing a book giveaway for every week for 10 weeks. And last week I was afraid I wasn't going to get any comments. I was like, does nobody want a book? Does nobody want me to mail them a personalized signed copies of, you pick which one of my books you want. It's so easy. You just go and look for the post from Wednesday. You'll see it in the caption. I'm Hey Andrea Owen over on Instagram, as I mentioned. And yeah, I'm doing a book. You get to pick which book you want personalized signed copy of. And thank you for listening to my announcements. Let's get into it, shall we? I knew that this was going to be a lesson. As I have mentioned 7,000 times here on the show, I got the word surrender tattooed on my arm, and I didn't take that very lightly when I picked the word. And if I was going to get a word permanently put on my body all by itself, I wanted it to be something that meant a lot to me. And what I mean by that is something that I needed a reminder of, something that I knew was going to be pivotal for me in my own life. And I felt called to have it be the word surrender. That was in 2016. And it really has been quite a journey since then of doing my best to surrender. So I'm going to get into it today and like, what does it mean? What does it look like? What does the life lesson of surrender look like in action? And how do we get better at it? I feel like I'm a decent person to talk about this because I fist fight over here with surrender. So I want to start by saying surrender isn't about giving up. That's what I hear a lot of times when like I ask people like, what's your relationship with surrender? You know, I might ask that in a coaching session and someone says, oh, it's about giving up, it's giving in. I don't look at it that way. And if you could reframe it, if you're someone who looks at it that way, if you could reframe it to think about surrender as letting go. So I want you to sort of keep that in your back pocket as I go through different anecdotes and different ways that we can practice surrendering in our lives. The first time I really started thinking about surrender in action was when my dad died in 2016. And from there, it made me think of other moments in my life where surrender had showed up for me in terms of that I needed to do it and didn't at first. And that my life would have probably been a little bit easier had I leaned more into surrender. So when my dad died, it was the first time I had ever lost someone like that and through death. And the grief was insurmountable. It wasn't the first time I'd experienced grief like that. I think my first divorce was probably the biggest, I should say, one of the biggest times that I experienced pretty enormous grief. There were other moments too before that, but we all have these pivotal experiences where we have what I called in the last week's episode. If you missed it, I would definitely go back and listen to that. The big four holy emotions. They are rage, terror, shame, and grief. When I experienced such a big emotion, I didn't want it. And I thought, well, if this is going to come at me, I want to do it right, using air quotes. And so that meant that I was pushing it away. I was trying to control it. I was trying to outsmart grief. And it was after a couple of weeks, I think, after my father had passed away, that I realized I don't have any control over this experience. I have to just get on the wave and ride it and let it carry me and let it take me. My fear was that it would completely swallow me whole and drown me, if we're going to run with this metaphor of the wave. I thought I would not come out alive. And so that's what made me fight it. And that's when I knew that like surrender was the key, looking at surrender as something that would help me in this. And then if I think back around 2011, when it was before that I knew I really needed to get sober. I needed to quit drinking, surrendering to the idea that the risk could pay off. The risk of getting sober might not completely change my life. It might not kill me, which I kind of in some way imagined that it would. That was another experience of realizing in retrospect that surrender would help me. The other thing was leaving my marriage and making that decision in early 2023 of surrendering to my inner voice that told me that this was the next best step for both of us, albeit an incredibly difficult one, but it was the next best step. So it was these pivotal moments in my life where I really had to lean into surrender, but I wanted to control the outcome instead. I wanted to hold on to an old life, to continuing to drink, continuing the pattern that I was doing. I wanted to hold on. I wanted to hold out hope that my marriage could work out in the long run, when intuitively I knew that both of us were better off if we went our separate ways. I preferred to try to muscle through. And then I just got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore in all of those situations and had to choose surrender. And so I want to point out 3 things that were like the moment of realization, like when surrender actually happened, like what shifted. It was, as I mentioned, it was listening to my intuition. It was realizing that all three of those examples that I talked about, entering grief, deciding to leave a very long relationship, getting sober, it was a major life decision. All of those three things involved processing very, very big emotions, very, very big emotions. See lesson 2 from last week. And the third thing was making the decision to walk forward in those 3 different instances, one small step at a time. It didn't need to be a giant leap, but it did need to be one step at a time. And I want to just circle back before I continue about what we get wrong about surrender. There's a myth about it, that it's weakness, that it is being passive, that it is resignation, it is giving up. And we have cultural conditioning around it that we instead can muscle through. We can just make it happen. Like, the thing that we don't want to let go of. We just keep trying, go big or go home, keep going. And then also, I would be remiss if I didn't say that our nervous system also creates resistance. Our nervous system is, the birthplace of fear and terror. Our nervous system tells us that it's better just to control it. We have trauma responses. They're very real, that make surrender feel impossible, that make surrender feel terrifying, just like this complete unknown. We prefer certainty, and surrender is all about vulnerability. I'm going to say that again. We prefer certainty, and surrender is all about vulnerability, which, yikes, right? I know. I also want to mention specifically, I want to point to what the role of surrender has to do in both personal growth, in your personal growth, as well as healing. So I think it's important to me to point that out. Surrender is deeply, deeply tied to self-trust. When we are not surrendering, we tend to self-abandon, because when we're not surrendering, we're likely not listening to our intuition. And when we're not listening to our intuition, we are self-abandoning. That was lesson 1 from 2 weeks ago. Surrender is deeply tied to self-trust. When we stop resisting our emotions, all of them, when we surrender to them, it is so much easier. They are finally able to move through us instead of getting stuck. Again, last week, and when I talked, the things that I said about the 4 holy emotions, grief, rage, terror, and shame, that is applicable for all of the emotions. If we allow them to move through they actually move through instead of getting stuck, instead of looping over and over again. I want to remind you that there's a worksheet available for this episode, as there is in all of them. The show notes, AndreaOwen.com/661. That's where the show notes are. And you can just click and we will send you a PDF worksheet. I think this one has 3 pages, but all of these 10 life lessons have worksheets to them. So you can sit down and do the work. But I wanted to just pause and give you a quick example of, if you and I were working together, if you were my one-on-one client and we were coaching around this topic about surrender, I might ask you questions like, this is one of my favorite questions, my favorite coaching questions, and to ask myself, and I wouldn't ask this in all places of someone's life around all topics, but the question is, what if it was just easy? What if it was just easy? I mean, I would ask myself that around grief. Like, what if processing grief was just easy? It's not that you're asking yourself for it to be easy. You're just asking, like, what if it was? What if I end up doing it and it was easy? Or what if I'm making it to be something bigger than it actually is? So that's what the what if it was just easy question is about. Another simple one is, what if this is just a story I'm telling myself? I can point to when I was thinking about getting sober, and like one of the fears that I had was that it would make me boring and that my life would be boring. I didn't know who I was outside of a party girl. I felt like my identity was going to completely change if I abstained from alcohol. What if it's just a story I'm telling myself? What if the opposite is true? What if I believed in other stories? What if anything is actually possible? I know, I go on and on with questions because that's what I do. Curiosity will always lead to clarity. All right, we're going to take a quick ad break. And when we get back, I'm going to talk about what surrender looks like in relationships. We'll be right back. Let's talk about something that doesn't get enough airtime: perimenopause and menopause. Hot flashes, sleepless nights, mood swings, brain fog, body changes. You're not imagining it. It's real and it's frustrating. But here's the good news. You don't have to live like this. Meet MIDI Health, specialized care just for women navigating this stage of life. With MIDI, booking a virtual visit is simple. You'll meet with a compassionate clinician who gets it. They'll listen to your symptoms, answer your questions, and create a personalized care plan just for you. MIDI Health treats hot flashes, night sweats, trouble sleeping, painful sex, vaginal dryness, and libido changes, weight and body changes, brain fog, memory lapses, moodiness, anxiety, and depression, period problems, hair and skin changes, joint pain, bone loss, and fracture risk, and more. MIDI's recommendations can have a huge impact on your well-being. And guess what? Visits and prescriptions are covered by major insurance providers. No memberships, no hidden fees. If insurance isn't an option, their affordable cash prices keep care within reach. You deserve to feel amazing. Don't wait. Book your virtual visit today at joinmidi.com. That's joinmidi.com. MIDI Health, specialized care for your next chapter.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate Pina Colada and Thai-iced coffee flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Este episodio es presentado por Honda. Descubra la nueva Honda Passport Trail Sport Todoterreno. La Passport más todoterreno que Honda haya imaginado jamás. Esta Passport cuenta con mayor altura al suelo, barras de techo en todas sus versiones y neumáticas especialmente diseñados para cualquier terreno. Además, disfruta todos tus viajes con el control de clima de 3 zonas, techo panorámico y opciones como asientos delanteros con calefacción y ventilación. Conoce más en honda.com/Passport.
Okay, we're back. So what is the role of surrender in relationships? Oi! I hope I don't go on too long around this one. I'll give you some examples. So surrender in relationships, Lord, have I learned this lesson the hard way in both of my marriages. Surrendering in a relationship might look like letting go of rigid expectations and softening into trust. Trusting yourself. It is about maybe trusting the other person that they're just going to do what they want. I think I've mentioned here on the podcast that I'm dating someone new. We just crossed the 6-month mark. It's very exciting. I've been referring to him as Dr. Fox over here on the podcast. If you haven't heard me mention him before, I'm calling him that right now to protect his privacy. I'll tell you a couple of things that have come up for me that have to do with surrender in terms of starting this new relationship. And one of them is surrendering to, as I just mentioned, that this person is going to behave the way that they want to behave, regardless of how much anxiety I have over it, regardless of how I even try to control it. And I say that because this is not how I always used to be. The level of anxiety I would have that my partner, especially in my first marriage, that he was going to leave me was off the charts. Granted, there were some things that were going on that were egregious that caused me to have a lot of anxiety that I would never wish upon anyone to stay in a relationship like that. However, when I entered this relationship, when I found myself getting a little bit squirrely, in the first few months, and I'm not saying it's not going to ever happen again, but it's just oh, I wonder, what this person is doing now. I haven't talked to them in a day and a half. Many of you listening might have that abandonment wound of is this distance that I'm sensing? Is it not? I surrendered to the knowledge and accepted that he is going to do whatever he is going to do. He is going to make his own choices. He has agency in his life. And it seems so simple, but repeating that to myself and also following it up with, and if he does something that I'm not okay with, if he does something that causes me to realize okay, this relationship isn't for me. Or if he comes to me and says like, hey, this relationship isn't for me anymore, because that's ultimately what I'm afraid of. I'm going to be okay. Am I going to be fucking sad for a long time? Yeah, probably. I will. And I'm going to also be okay. It sounds so simple, but like surrendering to that has totally changed how I show up in this relationship. So I'm going to kind of name off some things of what surrendering looks like in a relationship versus not surrendering. I'm going to kind of talk about it in a way that looks like balance, because you can surrender to the fact that your partner expresses love differently than you do while still advocating for your needs, while still listening to your inner voice that might tell you, okay, well, if that's the way that they express love, then it is just not the way I do. And this person is not for me. And that is scary and vulnerable. Okay. Healthy surrender looks like, yes, you can let go of control over how quickly things unfold, over their progress or how things unfold, while still staying true to what you deeply want and love. This is hard. This is hard, you guys. Raise his hand. I'm going to say that again. You can let go of controlling how things unfold, how things evolve, how quickly they evolve, while still staying true to what you deeply want and love. You can accept the imperfections in your partner while still holding boundaries around what you will and will not tolerate, what is and is not okay. The balance is key in long-term relationships. It's about staying open, trusting the process, while also staying rooted in your own personal truth, your own personal power, your own self-respect. This can be really hard to balance. I know. I am living it right now. I also want to mention, in regard to surrendering in relationships, one thing that's been particularly tricky for me that I have noticed now that I'm almost 50 and have 2 marriages, both of them very long-term relationships behind me. And this looked different, very different in both of my marriages, but it was surrendering to letting someone truly see me and love me. And it seems weird when I say it out loud. It's like, why on earth would I not let someone love me? I have learned that personally, it is more vulnerable for me to let someone love me than it is for me to love them. Because I feel like I have more control if I love someone else. The way that I show up for them, the way that I treat them, all of the things, I have agency over that. If I completely surrender and let someone all the way into my heart, I don't know how that's going to turn out. I don't know what's around the corner. That's the most vulnerable thing for me ever. That makes my throat tighten up, even just talking about it. Surrendering to allowing someone to love you can look like a few different things. So for some people, they really struggle with like letting someone help them, letting someone support them, accepting compliments, praise, admiration, adoration, things like that. One of the most difficult areas for me to feel loved and to be seen is around my self-expression, more specifically around emotions. So, fun fact that I found out later in life, I am highly emotional. I did not know because I shoved it down so well for so long. I had mastered it. I had mastered it. And so it really started to rear up after I got sober. I didn't have any place to shove it, unfortunately. I ran out of hidey holes. It started to happen then. And then as the years went by, it just kind of sped up and sped up and sped up. And then after I left my marriage, I decided, okay, if and when, I thought it would be years. And like, if and when I decide to enter another long-term relationship, one of my non-negotiables is I need to find a partner who is okay with that and who can not feel threatened or scared or not know what to do. And who was open to receiving feedback about, hey, here's how you can show up for me when I am emotional. Dr. Fox is very good at that. And it's been jarring, I'll say the least. It's been confusing and wonderful and weird and uncomfortable and so vulnerable and magnificent and like all this mix of emotions. Like I'm clenching my fists together as I'm telling you about this because it's one of those areas of surrender that has felt like I'm like spinning and I am trying to find a place to grab onto. I'm trying to find some kind of I need one of those rails to grab onto, and I don't have one. And so I have to make a conscious choice. Am I going to just throw my hands back and allow myself the massive vulnerability of being fully seen and feeling like raw and naked in all of my emotions? Because like that's what truly makes us human. Allowing that to happen is honestly like one of the biggest risks I've ever taken in my life. And so that might be where you're at. Perhaps you hold back in your partnership or even in your friendships or your relationships with close family members. Do you hold back in your self-expression because the fear of surrendering to all of that is just too scary? If you do, I get it. I 100% get it. And I was there for many, many, many years. And I can't ever promise you that it's going to work out. I can't. But just, I think the first step is just knowing. It's just in knowing that that's you. And I want to say this too, as women, like we oftentimes struggle with this because we've been conditioned to be the giver. We've been conditioned to be the caretaker, to allow someone to do that to us. Because seeing someone in all their self-expression and all their emotions, like the roles are reversed. Like we are allowing someone to be the caretaker for us. That can feel incredibly foreign. So I'm just going to say this one quick last thing. When you do surrender, and I also think it comes with trust too. I wouldn't recommend someone do it unless they intuitively can feel like they trust the person, but you create so much space for the love to deepen. It can feel like you're going to lose it all. The risk feels like so much. The vulnerability is so much, but I know that when we surrender to that, we can create space for the love to deepen. All right, switching gears. We're going to talk about how to do this letting go. How do we actually do it? Now we know what it looks like in our life, then how do we change it? Okay. So the first thing is, as you've been listening to this for however many minutes now, are you noticing areas in your life where you're, kind of gripping too tightly? And maybe the question to ask yourself is, where in my life am I trying to control the uncontrollable? Where am I looking for certainty in the uncertain? Who am I trying to control? Some common places, again, where we resist surrender are in our relationships. We try to control how someone shows up for us. In our work, we can push for a certain outcome. We might be forcing our own productivity. Definitely in our emotions. See lesson 2. And even with our bodies and our health, when we are resisting what our body is telling us. You may have heard my whole story about being pretty much medically gaslit for a year and a half around what turned out to be an autoimmune disorder. Are you ever ignoring your own body's cues that something needs to change or something about us needs to be taken care of? And so maybe the journal prompt for you to ask yourself is, what am I afraid will happen if I let go? What am I afraid will happen if I surrender? Start with emotions. What am I afraid will happen if I surrender to all of those big emotions? Because again, I want to remind you, surrender is not about losing control. It's about releasing the illusion that we ever had control in the first place. And I want to mention too that surrender doesn't have to be a massive life shift. Like this isn't just suddenly everything changes. For me, it's been these small increments over time. It's these small practices. So this might look like in conversations, instead of, as you're having a conversation with someone and maybe it's a hard conversation, instead of rehearsing what you'll say next, you fully listen. What I do, and especially as someone who was diagnosed with ADHD about 5 years ago, I used to do that a lot. I would be rehearsing what I was going to say, and especially in a hard conversation or a disagreement. Now what I do is I've learned to catalog points, and sometimes I forget them. Thanks, perimenopause. I've also started jotting down notes. I do this with Dr. Fox sometimes. Like, we'll be talking and I'll have like 3 points and I'll be like, I'm getting my phone out and I'll get out my notes app and I'll just, sometimes it's just a word that I jot down in my notes app to remember to go back to it, because that helps me stay present. That's surrendering to having to be right. Because sometimes when I jot that down, I end up not needing to make the point when he's done talking. And I'm like, oh, if I would have been rehearsing what I was going to say, I would have not listened to the rest of what he was saying. And then I would have still ended up in the same place and been like, well, never mind. I wasn't, forget it. And been confused. And it's not a great. I'm done doing that. Surrendering can also look like just leaving place for spontaneity, like in your daily plans. Like, do we need to overschedule every single minute? Sometimes it can be as easy as that. What if it was just easy? What if practicing surrender was just that? Also, when we talk about learning how to surrender in terms of your body and your health, sometimes this can be simple steps like dropping your shoulders, taking a deep breath, doing a body scan, releasing tension in places, stretching where your body is asking you to stretch. I'm thinking of my shoulders are often tight and needing to stretch those. In your relationships, like pause before reacting and ask yourself, what would curiosity look like right now? What would trust look like here? What would trusting that I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I trust that I'm going to be okay on the other end no matter what happens? Things like that. These short mantras can be incredibly helpful. Okay, we're going to take one more ad break. When we get back, I'm going to talk to you about several more ways that you can practice surrender in your life. Be right back.
Lowe's knows that free is just better. That's why MyLowe's Rewards is free to join. As a member, you earn points towards MyLowe's money on eligible purchases, get exclusive free gifts, and earn free shipping at Silver Key status, all on top of weekly member-only deals. Don't wait. Join MyLowe's Rewards for free today and start saving more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
So good, so good, so good.
Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack.
Because they have framed jeans.
Nike? Yes.
Just so many good brands.
Vince, Kurt Geiger London, Rag & Bone, and more are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. You never know what you'll find, but you know it's going to be so good. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
All right. Thank you for sticking with me. So we're talking about how to learn how to surrender. And I want to talk to you specifically around surrendering to your emotions instead of suppressing them. We often resist all of our emotions, but especially the big ones, grief, rage, uncertainty, because they feel too big. They feel like they're going to swallow us whole. True surrender means allowing the emotions to move through us instead of trying to control them, instead of trying to outsmart them. Always thought I could do it, but I couldn't. Also, instead of trying to numb them, I did it for years. I did it, and still sometimes I do. I still find other ways to numb my emotions. But the next time you feel an emotion rise up, just pause. Just pause. Instead of distracting yourself with your phone or with wine or whatever, you could say to yourself, I allow this. I trust that this will move through me. I trust that this isn't going to take over my life. If it were me, I would have to tell myself, I trust that this emotion is not going to kill me. Sometimes it's if we are actively avoiding a hard conversation, P.S., it's not the hard conversation. It's not just the hard conversation we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid the uncomfortable feelings that we know are going to come with that. Those are the moments that I would need to tell myself this and do this. I am nervous for these uncomfortable feelings and for this conversation. I do know this is going to be uncomfortable, but it will not kill me. I'm going to be able to figure this out. So notice what happens when you stay with it instead of pushing them away. I also cannot walk away from this podcast episode without talking about trusting the timing of your life, surrendering to the timing of your life. Do you think I was excited to have 2 divorces? I wasn't looking forward to it. And if you would have asked me when I was 20 years old if I thought that that was what my life was going to look like, I would have wanted to punch you in the face. No. So much of surrender too is trusting, is deep trust in the unfolding of your path. When things aren't happening as you think that they should, if you think that if they're not happening fast enough, maybe ask yourself, am I gripping because I don't trust life to work out for me? Am I angry about the way that this is unfolding because I don't trust that this is what's right for me? Is because I am unable to surrender that this might be the best outcome for me, that this particular pace of my life is the best outcome for me. I was sitting in my therapist's office just after I had left my marriage, and I was 47, I think, when that happened. And I wanted to have a hoe phase. And I was like, I want to do this. I've never done it before. And I'm in my late 40s. My body does not look, am I going to have to get naked with like the lights on in front of people? Like I was terrified. I had also never dated sober before. I'm like, am I going to have, oh my God, I'm going to have sober sex with new people. Because I got sober when I'd been married for 3 years. Like I didn't worry about that. So I had all these new worries. And I said to him, I regret not doing this sooner. I wish that I would have been going through this like mid-30s at the latest. And he said, you weren't ready for it yet. He's like, think about where you were emotionally, mentally, spiritually. He's like, you weren't ready for it. Trust the unfolding of your life. Trust that this is the perfect time for you. And 2 years later, y'all, I'm going to tell you, I had the best time. I had the time of my life. More on that later. I'm so glad that I got to do it sober. I'm so glad it did all work out. But that's just an example of gripping on because we don't trust that things are going to work out the way we think that they should. Who knows? You may have an example from your own life where you resisted something and you were frustrated that things didn't work out and weren't going the way that you thought that they should be going, and then it ended up being better than you ever imagined. And it was the outcome or the path that you did not want it to go, and it ended up better than you imagined. And the last point I want to make is around letting go of the outcome. Surrender also is about letting go of the outcome and focusing on the process instead. Letting go of the outcome and focusing on the process instead. We often resist surrender because we want a guaranteed certain outcome. But what I have learned in this almost 50 years is that real freedom comes when we shift our focus from how things will turn out to how we are showing up in the moment. That is real freedom. And as someone who has spent her life trying to control things, I never in a million years thought I would be saying this to you. But truly, real freedom and real joy comes from this thing that spiritual people call presence, being present. Do you guys know Laura Cathcart Robbins? She's been on my show a couple of times, and I've been on hers as well. And she's been in a long-term relationship with a man named Scott, and his last name is escaping me right now. They are not married. I asked them about that the last time I was on their show. I can't remember if it was during the recording or not. It may not have been. And they said that they take their relationship one day at a time. And this is something from 12-step programs, and they're both in recovery. They met in recovery. I might have them on the show to ask them about this because this is fascinating to me. I walked away from that conversation thinking, well, that's interesting. Like, what if, and I'm in this new relationship with Dr. Fox, and I brought it to him, and he liked the idea, and he and I have been talking about this, and it's like, what would that look like? What if we focused on being present and engaged? And I don't mean like engaged to be married, like engaged with each other, instead of trying to control the result, instead of rushing towards, are we going to get married? Are we going to get married? Like, I am a Gen Xer. Like, that's what we do. You meet someone, you like them, you get married. And it is so interesting to me to surrender. And it's not about, that wouldn't mean, that we don't make future plans together. And And Laura and Scott cohabitate. Like they have a long-term relationship and they're monogamous. Like it just is, it made me think about that is truly surrender. It's truly surrendering to the present moment because that's all we have. That is all we have. And how much time have I personally wasted worrying about the future, worrying about what my partner thinks of the future, worrying about, stressing out about the past and if that's going to repeat itself. Like, whoa, what if we took it, like, what if we didn't have to worry about that at all and we just thought about today and like how we're going to show up for each other today and the conversations we're going to have today, how I'm going to show up for it just kind of blew my mind. I don't know. It might just be me. But I also want to mention, I'm not an expert in it, but breath work can be a great body-based practice for surrender. And of course, meditation, because the body holds on to control in the form of the way that we breathe, shallow breathing, tension, making our nervous system tight. So any kind of body-based somatic practice can be helpful if you really struggle with surrender. And some final takeaways here is surrender isn't something you master once. It's a daily choice. It is about getting curious of how your resistance to it shows up in your life. It's about learning to soften, to allow, to trust that life is on your side, that the universe is always looking out for you. It might be about asking yourself every day, where can I practice surrender today? And just, I want to reiterate that the more we surrender, the more we open ourselves up to something better than we could have ever controlled into existence. That's what I can tell you coming home to yourself feels like, and something I've learned in my nearly 50 years here on the planet. And just a quick reminder that Write Your Way Through It, we start tonight, February 26th, and you can still join us late if you're listening to this a little bit late. And also if you want a worksheet for this particular episode, you can go to AndreaOwen.com/661 and Write Your Way Through It is in the show notes. It's also at AndreaOwen.com/program. Listeners, thank you so much for being here. You know how grateful I am. I know how valuable your time is. And remember, it's our life's journey to make ourselves better humans and our life's responsibility to make the world a better place. Bye for now. Hey, did you know there's free secret podcast episodes waiting for you that are not part of my regular podcast feed? Yes, AndreaOwen.com/free. And you just sign up. You get a link sent to you. It's very secret. It's like a secret club. We don't have a secret handshake. Don't worry about that. But it's these motivating podcast episodes that I made for you. They're under 20 minutes each. There's 3 of them. They're for wherever you are in your life. So head on over there and grab them. They range from really supporting you and seeing you where you are and being compassionate, all the way to giving you a giant kick in your ass and telling you how amazing and gorgeous and phenomenal you are. So AndreaOwen.com/free and get your hands on that free podcast feed.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.